Maria Gannet. She is relatively new in her position at UMass, focusing on weed management, coming out of a really strong Cornell weed ecology program really recently. And she's going to talk to us today about managing weed seed banks. And I think it's going to be really insightful and interesting. So, Maria, I'm going to let you go.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Quite the introduction. I don't know if I can, especially people are coming for a different topic, but anyway, I'll do the best I can and hopefully people get something from this and learn a little bit. Let's see here. Let me get my presentation started. Can everyone see that okay? Awesome. And yeah, I know that also David just asked you to put your um, cameras on if you can, but if you can't, don't stress about it. I can't see you right now very well anyway when I have my screen up. So that's my little secret. So anyway, my name's Maria. I am at University of Massachusetts, and I'm going to talk to you about soil seed bank management. Um, not related to soil health, but still an interesting topic. We're going to start today talking about what a soil seed bank is. And hopefully we'll just spend a little bit of time doing that so you have a little more context for what we're talking about. But hopefully the majority of the time we'll spend talking about how to minimize additions of seeds to our seed bank and how to maximize losses of seeds from the seed bank. So yeah, pretty simply, the weed seed bank is just the seeds that are in the soil on your farm's field. Um, these, since we're talking about farming, and these are the seeds that are already in the soil, not seeds that you're planting, we'll assume that all of these seeds within the soil in a field are weed seeds. So soil seed bank, but in this case, we're talking about weed seed bank. Generally, we'll have more seeds higher in the soil profile. And as you get deeper, you'll have fewer seeds within that seed bank. If you cultivate or till regularly, you'll have kind of more even distribution closer to the top of the soil. But at some point, you're still going to have fewer seeds once you get really deep within that soil profile. And kind of similarly, you're getting more germination from seeds that are higher in that soil profile. And as seeds get deeper into the soil profile, they'll still be there, but they won't necessarily be able to germinate. A lot of seeds, especially weed seeds, which are generally smaller than a lot of our crop seeds, germinate at very high or low depths within the soil profile. And seeds in the soil can be dormant or they can be not dormant. And dormancy is kind of cool. Seeds can switch back and forth between being dormant. And then if they don't germinate, they can go back to being dormant. But if they're in this dormancy stage, they can't germinate. And if they're not dormant, then they can germinate if the environmental cues are such that the conditions are right that species uh, feels like it's time to grow. Um, Seeds will eventually also die within the soil seed bank, but a dormant seed isn't necessarily a dead seed. Once a seed has died, it's no longer considered part of the soil seed bank. So this hopefully just gives you a little context about what the seed bank is and generally how it looks. There are lots of different sizes of seed banks. They can range quite dramatically. Hopefully, we'll get you from larger seed banks to smaller seed banks. That's some of these strategies that we're presenting here today. And it's not exactly a one-to-one relationship between the number of seeds in your seed bank and how much seedling pressure of different weed species you'll have, because it's species dependent. So generally, they say that if you know the density of seeds within your seed bank and then you multiply that by the establishment rate, then you'll know how many seedlings you'll have germinating within that soil. But that's species dependent. So it's going to matter what weed species seeds are in your soil. So I'm just going to talk through some examples of what I mean by that. It's like some species have different dormancy requirements, or all species have different dormancy requirements. This is a picture of some common ragweed. Common ragweed has a lot of dormancy. So only about 30% of the seeds will germinate at any one time. This means that like if you get a lot of common ragweed seeds in your soil, you won't be able to really stimulate all of their germination at once, but that common ragweed will germinate for a long time into the future because every year just a few more leave dormancy. The physiology of the species really affects how quickly they germinate. So this is a picture of velvet leaf, and velvet leaf has a really thick seed coat. So it takes a long time for water to enter into that seed to stimulate the germination of um, the velvet leaf seedlings. So if you have a lot of velvet leaf, again, it might be a long time that you're dealing with that velvet leaf. In any one year, you won't necessarily have a lot of velvet leaf germination, but over time, you're going to have a lot of velvet leaf in that field. And then different species vary on their environmental conditions that are right for them to germinate. So if you've got a lot of seeds in your seed bank, but they're, all these winter annuals, like we've got shepherd's firs here, then they're not going to be germinating. You won't have a lot of seedlings in the summer, in the heat of summer. But if the environmental conditions are right, and so it's, close earlier in the spring or later in the fall, then you might have a lot of more of this shepherd's purse germinating. But in general, if you have a really small seed bank, then you're going to have fewer seedlings, and a really large seed bank, a very dense seed bank, you're going to have a lot more seedlings. So this, of course, has repercussions for how hard it will be to manage your weeds throughout the season. And this is just kind of driving the point home that seed banks really vary in their size and their density. Our colleague Brian Brown, who's at Cornell, is finishing up a project right now looking at seed bank densities, and he sampled seed bank soils from farms all across New York, uh, ranging in geographies, ranging in whether they were organic or conventional, large farms, small farms, urban farms, rural farms, and vegetables, apple orchards, grain farms. And so he sampled 51 different farms. And so the x-axis here is just each farm has a bar. All the bars that are black are actually the vegetable farms. So you can see there's a range in densities on the vegetable farms as well. And then the y-axis is the seed bank density. So that's the number of seedlings per meter square of soil. And you can see that we range quite dramatically down from less than 100 seeds per meter squared to over 25,000 seeds per meter squared. So it's going to be much easier for you managing your weeds if you have something down near the 100 seeds per meter squared, and harder if you're over thousands of seeds per meter squared. And usually when I mention weed management practices, I always emphasize that it depends upon your species characteristics, how well the practice will work. And so this is a good example. Seed bank management really only helps you manage your summer and winter annual weeds. It can help somewhat with the perennials in terms of helping them not get established. But in general, this is a practice that will help with your annual weed management. The reason being is that both for summer and winter annuals, they're 100% reliant on the seeds within that seed bank to germinate and survive from generation to generation. So if you do a good job managing your seed bank, you'll do a good job managing these summer and winter annual weeds, because they won't be there to germinate and be a problem when you're trying to grow your crops. Okay, so that's just a really basic overview of what a soil seed bank is. And now we'll talk about ways to manage your seed bank. And just very simply, we're thinking about how to minimize additions of seeds to the seed bank and how to maximize losses of seeds from the seed bank. So if you can do those two things, you'll do a good job managing your seed bank. You minimize or seeds are added to the soil mostly through seed rain. So that's when a seedling will germinate and then successfully grow and flower and then set seed. And then those seeds will fall down and enter back into that soil in your field. But you also get additions of seeds from off-field locations by introductions of new species. So we'll talk about that here in a moment. You lose seeds from the seed bank through seed death or seed decay. You also lose them through seed predation, as well as seed germination. This germination is really a useful tool to minimize or to maximize the losses of seeds, but you have to make sure that you don't let it grow and flower and set more seed, because then you'll have seed additions with more seed rain. Okay, we're going to start by talking about how to think about reducing seed rain and how to reduce introductions of new seeds to your farm. So I feel like almost every talk I mention that prevention is the easiest way to manage weeds. So if you don't allow a new species to come to your field, then you don't have to manage it. And that's easier than having to do something and managing a new species. One of the ways that many seeds are introduced to a farm is through the amendments that you might bring to your farm. I like to kind of gain new examples of seeds being introduced through different amendments. Sometimes these are mulches, sometimes they're compost, sometimes they're manure. So the most recent example, kind of in the Northeast weed science world, everyone was all talking about it, the weed science meeting this year, is that one of the Cornell research farms now has herbicide-resistant Palmer amaranth. And they got this herbicide-resistant Palmer amaranth. They didn't used to have any Palmer amaranth at this field just, I think, about a year ago. Turns out one of their neighboring farms buys silage for their cows from the Midwest. And out in the Midwest, there's a lot of herbicide-resistant Palmer amaranth. So their silage came with some of this herbicide-resistant Palmer amaranth seed. This farmer's cows in New York ate that silage that was contaminated with the seed, and then that seed survived the digestive tract of the cows and was viable in the manure of those cows. And then Cornell purchased the manure of their neighboring farm as a soil amendment to help with nutrition. And now they have herbicide-resistant Palmer amaranth growing on their farm. And so, yeah, it's kind of the new species, and it's going to be hard for them to manage it because this Palmer amaranth can't be controlled with many of the herbicides that may otherwise work on this species. So just be careful of what things you're bringing to your farm, especially amendments, manures, compost, mulches, because oftentimes seeds can be in those materials. Another way that seeds are frequently brought to a farm is through harvest equipment. If you're going through a field at harvest time and some weeds have escaped, it's likely that seeds are viable on those weeds. And those seeds can easily get lodged in different pieces of harvest equipment. And then you're going to bring that piece of harvest equipment to another field to harvest that other field. And then those seeds can fall off. And now you've got a new species of weed in a new field. So if you take the time to clean your harvest equipment between fields, especially if you know you're in a really weedy field when you were harvesting, that can really help decrease this movement of new species to your fields. Sometimes weed seeds are in the seeds that we purchase to plant on our fields. That can be through cover crops, or sometimes even the crop species themselves can be contaminated with weed seeds. So just be sure that you trust the seed source of whatever seeds you're purchasing to plant. And then seeds also really get introduced frequently, sometimes in ways that we have no control over. So that can be through animals. In this case, we've got a bird that's eating some oriental bittersweet. It's going to poop that out and introduce that species to a new location. Sometimes wind, sometimes through rivers, species get introduced. So try to control introductions of new weed species where you can, and recognize that, of course, you don't have control over everything. Okay, so now we'll think about ways to reduce seed rain from species that have germinated from the soil in your field. And you can do this kind of throughout the life cycle of your crop. When your crop is growing, you want to make sure to reduce the number of weeds. So just having really good weed management practices are going to help you both in the year that you're growing that crop, and then long term, they will help you as well, because you'll have fewer weeds, fewer weeds means you're getting fewer seeds being introduced back into that soil. Um, in this situation, we've got a picture of some beans, and you can see some escaped weeds through that canopy. So the farmer did an okay job managing weeds, but didn't manage all the weeds. And in this situation, at this point, those weeds aren't really going to be competing with the crop much for resources. At this point, the crop is pretty well established. The weeds are pretty well established. The competition and any yield reductions are going to have kind of already happened. So you could make the argument that you don't really need to go through and weed these beans anymore. But I would argue that some of these species are going to, because they've escaped cultivation or otherwise control, they are going to set a lot of seed that will then be added to your soil feed bank. So we've got some barnyard grass. Barnyard grass, maybe one barnyard grass plant can produce about a couple thousand seeds. So let's say 5,000 seeds per plant. So, if those go back into your soil, that's going to be a lot more long-term management that you need to do. We've got some pigweeds here. Pigweeds can easily produce 500,000 seeds per plant. So, again, having one escape is really going to introduce a lot of seeds to that seed bank. And there's weeds that we can't see underneath the beans here as well. If you can manage those, even if they're shaded, they will produce seed. But if you have to prioritize, as you often do, your time, at least manage the tall weed escapes. The reason I would suggest managing at least tall weed escapes is because within a species, the larger the weed, generally the more seeds it will produce. So here we just have Palmer amaranth and water hemp, some graphs. The y-axis, we have the total seeds that those plants have produced. And on the x-axis, we have the biomass of those two different species. But these are both pigweeds. We saw some escaped pigweeds in the previous slide. But you can see the general trend. The more biomass that plant has, the more seeds it produces. So try, even when your crop is growing, to manage these large weeds that have escaped management otherwise. And then after harvest, don't forget about those weeds that have escaped and are still in your field. If you are going to go through and manage weeds at this point in time, of course, those weeds are no longer reducing your yield, but they will go back and be added to your soil seed bank. You can do this with burn down herbicide applications, like you see in the picture, kind of in the middle there. You can also do this with cultivation. You won't be killing necessarily seeds that are already on those plants, but if you kill the plants at this point in time, or the weeds at this point in time, then you will prevent them from forming new seeds and flowering further. So you're kind of potentially still adding seeds back to the seed bank, but you won't be adding as many if you manage your weeds at harvest. In the agronomic crops world, there are a couple different cool strategies that people use to manage weed seeds kind of during harvest. And so the next few examples I'm going to give are more relevant to agronomic crops than they are to a lot of our vegetable specialty crops. But a lot of the principles can slowly be taken into the specialty crops world. So I'm still going to talk about them and just be thinking about how this could relate in the near future to your weed management. These tools are generally called harvest weed seed control because they're managing your weed seeds at the time of harvest. So one major tool that people use is called chaff lining, and then they just modify a combine so all the chaff comes out in a narrow line, like you can see in figure B in their field. And this kind of has two benefits. The one benefit is that the weed seeds that are being added back to your soil are kind of being added in a discrete location. So potentially you know that you can do some more intentional management in that area. Also, because there's a lot of organic material in that chaff line, it kind of mulches itself, and there's less germination of seedlings within that chaff line than there might otherwise be if that chaff was just spread evenly across your entire field. So chaff lines can be beneficial. Again, I know that you don't use combines for your vegetable farms, but if you can think about a way of concentrating weed seeds at harvest, that can be helpful. Sometimes people will go through and they'll actually burn those chaff lines. This is called narrow windrow burning. The idea here is that there are still seeds, viable weed seeds in that chaff line, but if you burn that chaff, then those seeds usually are not viable afterwards. It can kill about 90% of the seeds that might be remaining in that chaff line. So this can be a helpful way, again, to reduce additions of seeds to your seed bank. I like this picture here because you can see where the farmer has burnt the chaff lines quite effectively, but you can also see where the fire escaped the chaff lines and burnt the entire field next to the one where this research was happening. Um, so this is also quite a dangerous practice, and I don't think people should just use it if they're not very comfortable with potentially burning crop residue in their fields. And I don't know what the rules are in Rhode Island, but can be powerful, but can also be dangerous. Luckily, in this particular photo of this research, there was a road on the other side of that we can't see in the picture here that prevented the fire from spreading further, but could have been more dangerous than it was, but definitely useful to use, but if you're confident. And then this, I love this example for for a couple of reasons. Um, One thing people now do in Australia quite extensively is use something called the Harrington seed destructor. So in Australia, they have large problems of herbicide-resistant weeds, such that some cropping systems, it's really becoming difficult for farmers to manage the weeds really at all with any herbicides. Those weed species are quite have developed resistance to multiple herbicides. So one of these farmers in Australia became quite invented. His name is Ray Harrington. He's in this picture here. And he invented this seed destructor. And basically the seed destructor gets, again, he's modifying the combine, and then all the chaff goes through a cage mill, which then crushes any weed seeds that might be remaining in that chaff, and then shoots the chaff back out onto the field. So this is something, yeah, developed in Australia, used extensively over there, really high rates of seed death after going through this cage mill. Now people are using it quite extensively also in the US. There's like a big research group out in Colorado, really kind of promoting this tool. And I think the second really cool part of this is there's a guy in Canada who's now developed what he's calling a potato vine crusher based on this Harrington seed destructor concept, where on his potato harvester, they've attached a roller mill to crush all the vines and any weed seeds that are remaining in the material that is harvested when they harvest the potatoes. And this is being done by a researcher who's also prioritized making sure that this technology is available for people to use. So there are instructions on how to build your own potato vine crusher if you are a large potato grower, freely available online. So this is kind of a cool technology available to all people, and also I think a great example of how these tools are being developed, maybe in agronomic crops, but being made useful for specialty crops as well. Okay, so then now you've managed weeds before planting, during planting, after harvesting the crops. You also don't want to forget about your field after the crop is completely removed from the field. So after harvest, would suggest, if you have a lot of growing season left, planting a cover crop. If you don't plant a cover crop and you have bare soil for a long period of time, weed seeds are going to be in your soil and they're going to germinate, and you're going to have seeds or weeds growing in your field, and those seeds may set seed, and then you'll have, more seeds in your seed bank and give yourself a headache in the future. A cover crop won't prevent all weed seeds from germinating, but it will kind of preempt some weeds from germinating because the cover crop will be germinating instead of that weed. So I've just got two pictures here. I do want to highlight that there are still, weeds in this cover crop planting. Here, especially we've got Johnson grass, which is a rhizotomous perennial weed. So, cover crop's not going to be an answer that's going to totally manage all your weeds, but it will help. So do recommend not leaving your soil bare, at least not leaving it bare unless you're intentionally doing it. Another thing that can be really helpful for managing weeds and especially thinking about the soil seed bank is crop rotations. We talk a lot about crop rotations for disease management and insect management, but it can also be really helpful for weed management, depending upon how you've kind of designed this crop rotation. So we're going to walk through why cover cropping can be, or sorry, crop rotations can be helpful for weed management. Weeds have different periods that they like to germinate. This is kind of how we classify weeds into summer annuals or winter annuals. So here we've got just a little chart where we have a bunch of different weed species listed, just a couple different weed species. And then at the top here, we've got our spring months, summer months, fall months, and then winter months. And then the blob that kind of corresponds with each weed species gets larger when there's more species or more germination during that month. So if we just look at common ragweed as an example, we can see that it's germinating a lot in April, May, and then starting to taper off in June and through July. And then we can compare that to something like horseweed, which we classify as a winter annual. And we can see that there's a lot of germination in March and April, and then no germination during the summer months, but then more germination again in September and October. So that's kind of how you look at this chart. If we're planting a warm season crop, then we know we're going to be disturbing the soil at a time that's going to really promote the germination of our summer annual weeds. So yeah, and then if we plant a cool season crop, we're going to be naturally disturbing the soil just in the planting and the bed prep at a time that's going to recruit more of our winter annual crops. So then if we think about how we can use this knowledge to design a crop rotation schedule, if we plant 2 years of a warm season crop, then we know we're going to recruit a lot of summer annual weeds. And then if we switch from summer annual crops to cool season crops, then we're going to be recruiting some of our winter annual weeds. And just because we actually get a lot of death within the soil seed bank in 2 years, actually having these 2 years of warm season crop followed by 2 years of cool season crop and then back to the warm season and back and forth, we're taking advantage of that natural death and managing our weeds that way. So crop rotations can be really beneficial for weed management. Okay, so that was kind of ways to think about minimizing additions of seeds to our soil seed bank. Now we'll talk about how to maximize removal of seeds from the seed bank. Again, this is through mostly death, decay, predation, and also germination. Okay, so I kind of already mentioned this, but I want to drive the point home, is that seeds within the soil seed bank, there's a steep decline in the viability of seeds within the first 2 years. So this is quite a busy chart. I'll just try to walk you through a little bit of it. So there's a bunch of different weed species, again, listed. And then these are just some of our annual weed species. Then these seeds are buried for different lengths of time. So we've got 0 years, 1 year, 2 year, all the way up through 17 years that the seeds are buried. And then the numbers here in the middle of this chart are just the percent germination. So some seeds of different species can survive for a really long time in the soil. So we're going to look at common lamb's quarters here. Even when seeds are buried for a really long time, so seeds are buried for 17 years, we're still getting 28% germination of the seeds that are buried for that long. So and it extends for quite some time. There's a very long tail of the length of time that seeds can be viable for. But many species die much more quickly when they're buried in the soil. So here we've got large crabgrass, and we're seeing really high germination rates, 12%, 48%, 28%, through probably the first 6 years. And then the seeds really aren't viable anymore. A lot of them have died at that point. Um, and in general, kind of research has shown that, of course, there's variation based on the species, and the species composition of the weeds, or sorry, of the seeds. But you get about 50% reduction in your seed bank within the first 2 years. So there's that really steep drop in the seed viability over the first 2 years, and then a really long tail where seeds can survive for over 100 years, some species after that. So just that's why that two year crop rotation cycle kind of works really nicely for managing weed species. Next, I'm going to talk about predation a little bit, but I'm not going to spend much time on this. There's been some research that we know that seeds are predated, and primarily this is done by beetles, also some by birds, but primarily by beetles. There's some beetles that eat a wide variety of different weeds seeds. And there have been instances where they've been able to kind of promote the growth of these different beetle species that are generalists in terms of weed seeds that they eat, and then show a significant decline in the soil seed bank. But this hasn't been done consistently. So we know that certainly beetles are eating seeds, especially weed seeds, on our farms. Perhaps sometimes they can lead to meaningful changes in our seed bank if you're able to have a lot of weed seeds near the surface of your soil, but it doesn't always pan out. So I'm not saying that this isn't happening, but I'm just saying that there's not many actions that we know you can currently take that will help you manage your seed bank. So if you really want to get into soil seed predation, you can try, reduce tillage, having a lot of seeds near the soil surface, but then also having a lot of seeds near the soil surface means you probably are going to have a lot of germination there. So, it's a little bit of a risky practice. But what has kind of been shown to consistently improve or reduce the seeds in our soil seed bank is by stimulating germination of different seeds. And we can do this kind of very intentionally as a way to manage the seed bank, draw it down. And there's like two primary ways that we can use germination to manage the seed bank. The reason we can kind of easily use germination as a way to draw down the seed bank is because tillage promotes germination of seeds kind of on average. Different species are going to have different cues. As long as they're not dormant, they're going to have different cues for when to germinate. But oftentimes those cues include things like oxygen. So that relates to how deep within the soil profile those are. Again, I mentioned a lot of weed seeds will germinate higher within the soil profile. You need just a larger amount of oxygen. The temperature of the soil really affects seed germination, including weed species. That's why we have our summer annuals versus our winter annuals. Sometimes a nutrient flush can really stimulate germination of particular species. Often nitrate is a cue for weed seed germination because these are species that love nitrogen and germinate quickly when they get access to nitrogen. And then sometimes a flash of light can be a cue for stimulating germination. And so when we till our field, we're kind of giving the soil on a whole all of those cues. So a lot of different species will germinate after you cultivate the soil. So we can use that to our advantage. One technique we would use is the stale seed bed technique. This is when you prepare your bed for planting far in advance of when you actually plant that crop. And you want to do all the cultivation, all the bed prep at this time in advance of when you plan to plant. And then you actually want to stimulate germination and kind of ensure as many seeds will germinate as you can by, providing water if it's not raining, and irrigating this kind of bare field, to get those seeds out of the soil. And then you want to come back through and kill all those emerged seedlings, um, with as little soil disturbance as possible. So you can do this with a burn down herbicide application, or perhaps you want to use flaming, or you can use a very shallow tillage event as long as you're not, disturbing the soil and bringing new seeds to the surface. You can do it with something like tarping, but you just need to make sure to kill those seedlings that have emerged before planting. You can repeat this process if you have time. So you can do stale seed bed several times before planting a bed. And then you want to plant your crop immediately after you've killed your seedlings that have emerged. And so this just gives your crop an early advantage when it's establishing, and also is removing seeds from that seed bank. Another way that we use tillage to intentionally remove seeds from the seed bank is through fallowing the field. So when we're fallowing the field, we're not planting a crop. And in this case, if we're doing a mechanical fallow, we're going through and we're regularly tilling the soil. And again, that's just going to cause that as much germination as we can get. And then if you go through and cultivate again, you'll kill those emerged seedlings before they have time to grow and set seed. And you can do this kind of very intentionally if you know you have a field that has one particular problematic weed. You can time your fallow period with the period that weed is going to be emerging anyway. So if we're going to target, in this example, Pennsylvania smartweed, and we know it germinates a lot in April, May, then we might want to intentionally put our field in fallow during those months, get as much Pennsylvania smartweed out of that seed bank as we can, and then proceed and plant a crop in that field. This can be hard on your soil structure. Obviously, repeated tillage over time can lead to reduced soil health and structure. And so incorporating practices like cover cropping along with fallowing a field can be really beneficial to help offset some of the negative effects of this practice. But I do want to mention, I tried to pull most of the information from this talk from different research papers, but there are also other ways to learn about soil seed bank management. And these two farmers, I don't know them. I just read about them in preparation for this talk. But they're Eric and Ann Nordell, or Anna Nordell. I think Ann Nordell. They are farmers in Pennsylvania. I think they grow mixed vegetables, and it's the two of them as well as horse-drawn equipment. And they have really kind of attributed their ability to farm their field with really minimal labor inputs because of their focus on the soil seed bank, especially early on when they were first establishing their fields. So they did a lot of fallowing, they did a lot of crop rotations, and they've shared a lot of their knowledge gained by farming in this way and really thinking about the soil seed bank online. So I put a link here to a YouTube video of them giving a presentation, as well as they've got some like PDF type worksheets, or not worksheets, fact sheets. That's the word I was looking for. Some fact sheets online to help people learn how to manage the soil seed bank. And then they've also written this book, Weed the Soil, Not the Crop. And so if this is a practice that's interesting to you, I would encourage you to seek out these other resources as well. And I want to say that I think they were eventually able even to transition into like living covers as mulches. But they say that they didn't do that transition until after they had gotten their seed bank under control. And once their seed bank was under control, then they were able to do some of these higher level practices that otherwise wouldn't have been successful on their farms. And yeah, that's kind of all I have to talk about today.